Saturday, January 17th, BelieveDigi and National Cornerstone Healthcare Services had the privilege of presenting the first Powering Through event in Southern California, Hemophilia in Entertainment, at the beautiful Solar Studios in Glendale, California. There were interactive entertainment exhibits for young people, and a fresh and healthy Mexican-inspired meal was provided for free by Superfood for Super People Catering, a female and minority-owned local business. The centerpiece of the day was an enlightening conversation on hemophilia in entertainment and the media with Joel Stein, writer for Time Magazine, Maddie Van, podcaster and hemo mom, Patrick Droney, musician and living with von Willebrand's disease, and Rebecca Berenson, actor and hemo mom. Powering Through is an inspirational speaker series where we bring people from both within the community and from outside of it to talk about obstacles and challenges that they have faced in the pursuit of becoming their best selves. And as we're in Southern California, it felt very appropriate to further specify today's event and make it about entertainment and media and the bleeding disorders community. So we have these four fine panelists to be speaking on that very topic.
You're the first person I've met with a bleeding disorder.
Well, I'm happy to have introduced you to the community.
Yeah. Am I a part of it now?
You are a part. I think so, right? Like, all you gotta do is come to the events and you're in.
Wow.
Yeah. It's not a very high bar,
No,
so
I got the feeling, yeah.
Yeah. But you're in nonetheless. So Patrick, I want to start with you. What first drew you to music? What first inspired you to write? I saw a picture on your Facebook page from not too long ago when the guitar looked like it was 3 times the size of your body.
Yeah.
So you've been playing for a long time. What first brought you to it?
So I couldn't really play sports growing up, obviously. So music was a really safe thing for me to do, and it was a good outlet for me to channel all that extra energy I had that I couldn't really put into physical activities as much as I could have if I didn't have a bleeding disorder. So, with that being said, I've had a different perspective all my life, and I've been different than every other kid I knew. And I think with a chronic illness, you're different, and you have different experiences and you see life in a different way. And if it's not me, it's my friends, or it's the kids in the oncology next door. It's perspective, so that's invaluable. As a musician, it is a constant in the back of my head. I'm touring. I just got off a 2-month tour, 42 states, 15,000 miles.
42 states?
Where are the hemophilia treatment centers? Do I have my factor? Is
Yeah.
everything okay? I'm getting a nosebleed in the bathroom in the hotel room. My buddy Kyle's figuring out what to do. It's like, there's little things, and it happens. But for me, it's always been a motivation, just kind of, I could use music as a platform. I've always kind of seen that as like my duty.
Something that comes up in the community a fair amount, especially in parts of the country that are so sports-oriented, it can become quite a hurdle to try to speak to a young person with a bleeding disorder about why they should consider other forms of extracurricular social activities. So it's great to hear that you had that presented to you as an option.
Definitely. I was very lucky.
I didn't do any sports, even though I didn't have a bleeding disorder. I also didn't play music.
But you found writing.
Yeah, also safe. Yeah.
Why do you
I
say
basically
safe?
wanted the same safety as someone with a bleeding disorder as a child.
Well, it's interesting, though, that you say writing is safe because your writing style, it's very personal. You put yourself and your family under a microscope a fair amount. That's a very vulnerable position, I imagine, to put yourself in.
I've never felt physically threatened from anything I wrote. I wrote one thing that a couple people sent death threats, but they were really just people being angry, but my wife didn't see it that way. So that's when I wrote a column called I Don't Support the Troops. Mm-hmm. And it turns out America supports the troops.
Maddie, you started your podcast. You got involved in entertainment and media as a result, in a way, of your son's diagnosis. You put yourself out there. Your approach, as well as someone who's putting media content out there, is very personal.
It's scary because you do reveal a lot, and there are people, especially now with the internet and having open access to everything, that can find where you live. They can find where your son goes to school. So it's a little difficult. It's kind of scary putting yourself out there, but I think all of us have to do that at some point in their life. I'm openly upset about the way things in Southern California, concerning some of our foundation work, go. So I'm trying to change that. There's a lot of people that have connected with me because of that. They feel they've been ousted. They feel like they're not a part of the community. So we'll start our own community.
Sure.
And it seems to be working.
It's like you said, if you're open about it and you said, worried about your son's safety, who are the blood disorder people. Like I didn't know. Like why would you not be open, and why would someone come after your son because he's a human?
Just being on the internet, because starting another podcast for my personal blog where it's a little more opinionated. I've heard of some people in the community getting bashed, or I would say abused, I guess, on like the Facebook, and they'll find out where they live and just be horrible to them. So
about what?
they don't like what they're talking about.
So there's a certain amount of like high school level small town politics because it's a small community. So anytime you have a small community, these kind of things can escalate to an unnatural
What about
degree.
the open thing? Like,
So there are a lot of products in our community that make a lot of money for those who manufacture it, those who sell it, those who distribute it. So in certain parts of the country, there are events that only if you are a part of this specialty pharmacy home health provider are you allowed at this event. We're small enough, we don't need to be smaller. There's also people in positions to serve the community who maybe aren't doing their best job at that, and maybe are better at fundraising for an organization than developing programming through it, and that becomes a point of strife. I think that's fair to say, right? I'm getting looks, and this is all recorded, so here we are. But
Power to the people.
We're not the only ones who feel that way. So in the beginning of your book, you talk about your identity as a man and what masculinity means, and how upon having your son, it started to shift, right? And it kind of took a different form. I'm curious for you guys, when you found out that, as moms, you joined the community because of something that your child has, not something that you have. How did that diagnosis, and I'm really curious about the misdiagnosis of Shane, Rebecca, how did that process kind of change what you were anticipating as a parent?
It just threw a wrench in my whole plan. I had already had a healthy young lady, and when Shane was misdiagnosed, I lost a lot of trust in the medical field. I felt betrayed in a way. Shane had been originally diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. So he was being treated with blood thinners and heat, and it was almost 3 years of that for Shane. He had had several bleeds, I think, from the time he was about 2, maybe even a little younger, where we would take him to specialists, orthopedists, everywhere. Nobody ever said, could he have a bleeding disorder? So it took Shane having 2 teeth pulled and him bleeding for 2 months solid after that time before we took him in, and he had to get his blood transfused, and it was the beginning of the new chapter in our life.
What does awareness really mean? When you hear about doctors, when you hear about hematologists that misdiagnose people that have hemophilia because of how rare it is, to me that's a great case for the importance of awareness, because if anyone needs to know about the diagnosis, medical treaters need to know about the diagnosis. And if somehow they are missing it, then there's a symptomatic problem. There's a bigger problem to address. So to me, that's an unfortunate story of why awareness and education is so important.
I was under the impression that if I hugged my child, he would have bruises around his torso, he would die at 36. Like, I had all these horrible things in my head. And going to certain websites that try to help you, they really don't, because they're just all these sad sack stories, and you never know what you just project all of your fears onto it, which is why I started the podcast. As a new mom coming into the community, it's terrifying. I didn't want to have children after that. I thought I wanted to have more. Decided I didn't want to, but now I've changed as well. I've discussed that might happen. I've decided we're going to be fostering kids now because it's kind of easier to have a hemophilia. Maybe it's something else to focus on rather than all the other bad stuff in the world. I already know my hemophilia kid's gonna be, smarter, or people in hemophilia families, smarter, more talented, more this, more that, because they mature faster. The families that have hemophilia mature faster, I think, and then they find their passions and what they're good at quicker because they're forced to grow up quicker.
Kind of fascinates me how many people outside of our community don't know about the blood contamination crisis and the role that hemophilia played in recognizing HIV as a bloodborne virus, and how our community in this country
was lucky if you had severe hemophilia, you were lucky to see 30 only 50 years ago, and 80% of the world does not have access to adequate medicine, and that's still true for them. Those are mind-boggling facts, and yet people don't know about it. Am I just so close to it that it feels like it's something that's been underreported and underrecognized, or are those kind of stories prevalent all over the place?
I assume it was reported in the 80s when it happened.
Yes.
And now it's not news, so why would you talk about it?
Right. It just seems to me in studying health in schools and in studying societies that when the protocol in place leads to 90% of a population being given one of two fatal viruses, that's like mind-blowing, and we're not that far away from it. And so much of the world still doesn't even have the factor products that did come as a result of that really dark period. And it just doesn't feel like something that's well known.
There's just too much new news all the time. So when something happens, you report it, and then it goes away. And, that's shocking and super interesting. But in terms of the scope of the AIDS crisis, obviously it's a tiny number-wise percentage. I mean, genocidally, it's a huge number you're throwing out, but like compared to what's happening in, say, Africa with AIDS, or I could see why it would be reported at its time as a small part of the AIDS crisis and then not come up again. I mean, it's hard when there's so few of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It makes it really hard.
Don't you think, though, it's also underreported now? Because I think growing up, we have a complacency that we think it's going to be all fine, but that can happen again. It could be happening right now, we don't know it, with some other type of thing coming into our medication.
I mean, just look at last year with Ebola and how we freaked out.
It was horrible, right?
Like, we just went bananas, and we forget. We seem to have a short-term memory on how to handle crisis and the unknown, and we go to prejudice and fear and anger a lot quicker than understanding and a desire to love and embrace. And if we report the news but then forget it and move on, it's cliche, but history will repeat itself. So I guess that's where the question comes out of, is how do we remember the lessons from these crises to ensure that the people who suffered the most from it, it wasn't for nothing. We learned, we moved forward, and we take that lesson forward. I don't know the answer. I think entertainment actually has something to do with it. I think finding ways to make jokes, I think finding ways to write songs, finding ways to make movies that take those lessons and put it into an entertaining package that can be easily digested, it may be the best way to carry a message forward.
Absolutely. Which is something that I have to add that you do very well with Stop the Bleeding, because when we first initially were diagnosed, we Googled resources here in Southern California, and I came across a comedy web series about...
I love that we were a resource in Southern California.
I know. But look how you've turned out to be just such an amazing, you have an impact on my son, on our family, and it's just been a great experience. And we found it because of the humor that you brought to the table while trying to also educate people and bring awareness to the bleeding disorder community.
One of the things we're most proud of at BelieveDigi is our programming. And adults, industry, parents, and kids in the community were entertained, inspired, and gave great feedback and contributions of their own.
Baby, look at the state you're in. Baby, I'll be your weatherman. Baby, I'll be your weatherman. Baby, I'll be your weatherman. I might bleed a little, but I'll be your weatherman. Yeah.
There you go. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate you having me. Thank you, Patrick.
And to top it all off, we just had a great time. For more information on BelieveDigi programming, visit us at BelieveDigi.com or YouTube.com/BelieveDigi. For more information on National Cornerstone Healthcare Services, or NCHS, visit NC-HS.com.